"Mom, who let these men into your house?" I demanded, bursting through the door to find 3 men in suits surrounding my 72-year-old mother with clipboards and badges. They claimed to be doctors from the state medical board. Mom whispered, her hands shaking. Said they needed to evaluate my mental fitness. "I'm State Attorney General Janet Reynolds," I announced, watching their faces pale. "And whatever fake credentials you're using, you just committed multiple felonies." 1 year after sending our corrupt HOA president to prison for a similar scheme, they were trying again. But this time, the operation was bigger and more dangerous. My phone buzzed with a message: "Back off your investigation and gubernatorial campaign, or next time we won't just evaluate her, we'll take her." As they fled to their unmarked car, I memorized their license plate, my blood boiling. The Mitchell case had exposed corruption throughout the state's HOA systems, making me powerful enemies. Their message was clear: back off, or lose what matters most. What they didn't understand was that they'd just made the biggest mistake of their lives. "No one threatens my mother, no one." I pulled into Mom's driveway, spotting an unmarked black sedan parked across the street. 2 men were retreating toward it as my headlights swept over them. I memorized the license plate before they drove off, then rushed to Mom's door. She was sitting in her kitchen, shaking but composed. "They had badges, Janet, official-looking ones." She handed me a business card. "Dr. James Cooper, State Medical Evaluation Board." A board that doesn't exist. "What did they want?" I asked, already taking pictures of the card. They said there had been concerns about my cognitive decline, reported by multiple sources, that they were conducting follow-up evaluations on cases from last year. She straightened her spine, professor mode activating. I told them I wasn't answering any questions without my daughter present. That's when they became insistent. I called Detective Matthews immediately. "Sarah, I need a team at my mother's house now." While waiting, I checked Mom's property, finding tiny cameras hidden in her garden lights. Someone was watching her. Someone had been watching for weeks. By morning, we had officers processing the scene, and I'd moved Mom to my apartment downtown. The license plate belonged to a rental car paid for with a stolen credit card. The fingerprints in Mom's house matched nothing in our database. These weren't amateur intimidators. This was professional. That afternoon, I received an unmarked envelope at my office. Inside was a single photo. Mom shopping at her favorite grocery store yesterday. Written on the back: "Governors need to protect their families first. Withdraw your candidacy by Friday." I called an emergency meeting with my campaign team and security detail. "I'm not withdrawing," I told them firmly, "but I need to know who we're dealing with." My campaign manager, David, looked grim. "Janet, it's probably the Westlake Development Group. They've bankrolled every corrupt official the Mitchell case exposed. Your governorship would destroy them." Westlake. The name made sense. They'd lost millions when our investigation froze development projects tied to the Mitchell schemes. Their CEO, Richard Westlake, had publicly called me an opportunistic crusader, using my mother for political gain. I spent the next 2 days digging deeper. Westlake had connections to the current governor, 3 state senators, and the banking commission. Their tentacles reached everywhere. Meanwhile, Mom was growing frustrated with her protective detail. "I'm not hiding in your apartment forever, Janet," she declared on day 3. "I have classes to teach and a life to live. Mom, these people are dangerous. So we let them win? Make us prisoners?" She folded her arms. "I taught you better than that." She was right, we needed to fight back, but carefully. That's when I remembered Mrs. Chen's grandson, a brilliant cybersecurity expert who'd helped during the Mitchell case. Within 48 hours, he'd uncovered a network of shell companies connecting Westlake to a dozen HOAs across the state. More disturbingly, he found a pattern of elderly residents being pushed out through various means, all living in properties Westlake subsequently developed. "It's systematic," he explained, showing me the data. The Mitchells were just middle management in a much larger operation. I took the evidence to Judge Ramirez, who had presided over the Mitchell trial. She reviewed it in her chambers, her expression darkening. "This warrants investigation, but Janet, be careful. Westlake has friends in federal positions. Your jurisdiction has limits." "Justice shouldn't," I replied. She sighed. "I'll approve your warrants, but watch your back." With warrants in hand, we began tracking financial records, communications, and movements of key Westlake executives. Meanwhile, Mom insisted on returning home despite my objections. "We'll install security systems," I argued. "Already have that," she countered. "What I need is to show these bullies I'm not afraid." The morning Mom moved back home, Richard Westlake announced his full support for my gubernatorial opponent, Senator James Harrison, a man with a spotless public image but questionable financial ties. That same day, I received an email from an anonymous source, footage of Senator Harrison meeting secretly with Westlake executives 3 days after the doctors visited Mom. They were planning something, and the timeline was accelerating. When Mrs. Chen called to say she'd received a similar medical evaluation notice, I knew we were running out of time. This wasn't just about me anymore. They were targeting everyone connected to the Mitchell case. The final straw came when Mom called from the university where she taught part-time. "Janet?" Her voice was steady but tight. "The dean just informed me that an anonymous donor is threatening to withdraw funding unless they review my fitness to teach. The donor is Westlake Industries." Everything unraveled in a single afternoon. I was in the middle of a press conference addressing housing rights when my security detail rushed the stage. Mom had been taken to the hospital after collapsing at the university. By the time I arrived, they had her sedated and restricted to authorized visitors only, which somehow didn't include me. "I'm her daughter and the Attorney General," I told the hospital administrator, my voice deadly calm. "And I have a court order signed by Judge Greenwood," he replied, sliding over documents declaring my mother incapacitated, with temporary guardianship granted to a state-appointed conservator. Judge Greenwood, who had received $50,000 in campaign donations from Westlake last year. When I tried to call Judge Ramirez, my phone died. Outside, reporters were already gathered, somehow tipped off about a health crisis involving the Attorney General's mentally declining mother. I found David pacing in the parking lot. "They've frozen our campaign accounts," he said, ashen-faced. "The Election Commission received evidence that we're using illegal funding methods. They're calling for your resignation." I barely had time to process this when Detective Matthews called from my office phone. "Janet, they're executing a search warrant at your mother's house right now, and there's more. They've filed for emergency removal of your investigation team from the Westlake case, citing conflict of interest." In 6 hours, they dismantled everything I'd built and seized control of my mother. This wasn't just corruption. It was a coordinated attack designed to destroy me personally and professionally. I couldn't fight the hospital, the courts, the Election Commission, and Westlake simultaneously. Mrs. Chen found me sitting on a bench outside the hospital, staring at nothing. "They came for my grandson this morning," she said quietly. "Immigration issues suddenly. He's been a citizen for 12 years. I looked up at her, this tiny woman who had already endured so much. Behind her stood Mr. Gonzalez and 3 other neighbors from the Mitchell case, all waiting, all watching me. "They're trying to break us," Mrs. Chen said simply. "Are you broken?" Mrs. Chen's question echoed in my mind. "Are you broken?" I straightened my spine, feeling a familiar cold resolve settle in. "No, I'm angry." I gathered our small group under a tree away from prying eyes. They've coordinated this attack perfectly, but they made one critical mistake. I looked at each face. They assumed I'd play by their rules. My phone might be compromised, but Mr. Gonzalez still had his. I called my deputy AG, Lisa Martinez. Lisa, Protocol Omega, now. Protocol Omega was our office's emergency response to suspected corruption within the judiciary. Within 30 minutes, a judge from the federal district would be notified, bypassing local authorities entirely. Next, I turned to Mrs. Chen. I need your help reaching your grandson. She nodded. They took his phone, but I know how to contact him. While we waited, I outlined our counterattack. We're not just facing corrupt individuals anymore. This is systemic. So we fight the system by exposing it all at once. Judge Teresa Voss from the Federal Circuit arrived at the hospital within the hour, her federal marshals making quick work of the private security stationed outside Mom's room. The hospital administrator blanched when presented with a federal order superseding the local guardianship decree. You can fight this, Judge Voss told him coldly, but be aware that interfering with a federal investigation carries significant penalties. Mom was awake within 20 minutes of the sedatives, wearing off, furious but unharmed. The blood tests we demanded showed traces of mild tranquilizers in her system, administered without consent and conveniently making her appear confused when she'd collapsed. They drugged me, she said, outrage blazing in her eyes. In my own classroom. Mrs. Chen's grandson had managed to secure an untraceable connection, working remotely to help us despite his own troubles. I've been mapping their network, he explained through the secure line. They didn't expect us to have backups of everything. I've located their command center, Westlake's private office at the Riverside Tower. With Judge Voss's authorization, federal marshals secured Mom's house before local authorities could plant anything incriminating. Meanwhile, Lisa had assembled our most trusted investigators to execute simultaneous warrants on 5 locations, including Westlake's headquarters. As night fell, we gathered at the federal courthouse. The evidence was overwhelming. Emails, financial records, and recorded conversations revealing the entire operation. Westlake hadn't just targeted me and Mom. They'd systematically worked to control housing across the state through corrupted HOAs, judges, and officials. Richard Westlake himself was brought in at midnight, his smug expression faltering when he saw me sitting with Judge Voss and 2 federal prosecutors. This is a mistake, he announced smoothly. I have friends in Washington who... Judge Voss cut him off. Your friends in Washington are currently answering questions of their own, Mr. Westlake. We've been building this case for months. His face slackened. Months, I leaned forward. Did you think the Mitchell case was the end? It was just the beginning. Every connection they revealed, we followed. Every corrupt official they named, we investigated. You weren't watching us, Richard. We were watching you. The truth was, my gubernatorial campaign had been the perfect cover. While Westlake focused on stopping my political ambitions, my office had been quietly building a RICO case against his entire operation. The attack on Mom had simply accelerated our timeline. Westlake's composure cracked. You can't possibly have enough. The door opened, and Senator Harrison was led in, looking ashen. Behind him came Judge Greenwood and 3 other officials we'd identified as part of the network. They've been talking all night, Judge Voss informed Westlake. Quite competitively, in fact. By dawn, we had confessions from 4 key players, each hoping to secure leniency by betraying the others. The case was airtight, but I wasn't done. I faced the assembled press on the courthouse steps as the sun rose, Mom standing proudly beside me. Camera flashes illuminated the tired but determined faces of our neighbors who'd stood with us through the night. Today, we've uncovered the largest corruption scheme in our state's history, I began. A network that used homeowners associations as weapons against vulnerable residents. That manipulated medical evaluations, legal proceedings, and financial regulations to seize property and silence opposition. The cameras rolled as I laid out the full scope of Westlake's operation. Not just the corrupt HOAs, but the judges, officials and business leaders who had enabled them. Behind me, federal agents were executing arrests at mansions and office buildings across the city. This case began with my mother, I continued, taking her hand, but it encompasses thousands of victims, elderly homeowners forced from their properties, families intimidated into silence, communities destroyed for profit. Mom stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. They thought targeting a professor and her daughter would be easy. They forgot that education and justice are the two forces that tyranny fears most. As if on cue, Mrs. Chen and Mr. Gonzalez joined us, followed by dozens of other victims we'd identified through our investigation. Each held photographs of homes they'd lost or been forced to sell. This stops today, I declared. Not just for my mother, not just for these brave individuals beside me, but for every homeowner in our state. No more fraudulent evaluations. No more abusive HOAs. No more corruption masquerading as community standards. The crowd erupted in applause as federal marshals led Westlake and his co-conspirators to waiting vehicles. Their empire was crumbling in real time, broadcast live across the nation. 6 months later, I stood on Mom's porch again, watching as neighbors gathered for our block's first community celebration. The Westlake trials were ongoing, with 37 indictments across the state so far. My gubernatorial campaign had... 6 months later, I stood on Mom's porch again, watching as neighbors gathered for our block's first community celebration. The Westlake trials were ongoing, with 37 indictments across the state so far. My gubernatorial campaign had resumed, now focused on housing reform and elder protection. Mom had returned to teaching full-time, more popular than ever with students who'd followed her story. The university had severed all ties with Westlake Industries, establishing a legal aid fund for seniors facing housing discrimination. Mrs. Chen's grandson received a formal apology from Immigration Services and a job offer from the state attorney's office. Mr. Gonzalez now headed a newly formed HOA oversight committee, ensuring no association could ever again become a weapon against residents. "You know what I realized?" Mom said, handing me lemonade as we watched children playing freely in yards that once faced violation notices for being too lively. "What's that?" They never understood what makes a community strong. It's not property values or matching paint colors. It's people standing together when it matters. I smiled, thinking of how her words would become the cornerstone of my campaign slogan, "Standing together when it matters." Across the street, where Karen Mitchell's